Hello and welcome to Zoom in Africa Climate Change. Research indicates that the Earth's climate is changing at a rate that has exceeded most scientific forecasts. Some families and communities have already started to suffer from disasters and the consequences of climate change, which has forced them to leave their homes in search of a new beginning. On Zoom in Africa today, we take a look at the massive floods, uprooted families, disrupted fishing, and destroyed farms in countries like Kenya, Senegal, and Mozambique. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees recognizes that the consequences of climate change are extremely serious, including for refugees and other people of concern. The Global Compact on Refugees, adopted by an overwhelming majority in the UN General Assembly in December of 2018, directly addresses this growing concern. It recognizes that climate environmental degradation and natural disasters increasingly interact with the drivers of refugee movements.
Science is clear. We're seeing an increase in desertification. We're seeing an increase in rising sea levels. This is causing more challenges for people to survive. People will be forced to move. There will be increasing tensions. There will be increasing conflict. And unfortunately, we're likely to see an increase in numbers of people forcibly displaced. So we either wait for these situations to occur and for people to move, or we become increasingly proactive.
The impacts of climate change are numerous. Limited natural resources, such as drinking water, are likely to become even scarcer in many parts of the world. Crops and livestock struggle to survive in climate change. Hotspots where conditions become too hot and dry or too cold and wet, threatening livelihoods and exacerbating food insecurity.
4% of the world's refugees are located in developing countries, and these are the countries which are likely to be most impacted by the adverse impacts of climate change, whether it be desertification, extreme cyclonic events, increasing storms.
People are trying to adapt to the changing environment, but many are being forcibly displaced from their homes by the effects of climate change and disasters, or are relocating in order to survive.
We often refer to climate change as a risk or threat multiplier because it's extremely difficult to attribute why people are moving. But what it is doing is it's reinforcing underlying vulnerabilities. It's creating increased competition over resources. It's leading to stresses in relation to intercommunal tensions. It's leading to challenges on livelihoods around the world.
New displacement patterns and competition over depleted natural resources can spark conflict between communities or compound pre-existing vulnerabilities. UNHCR is providing protection and assistance for many people forcibly displaced by the effects of climate change and disasters, among other drivers, and is working to increase their resilience.
While climate refugees does not exist under international law, it does capture the sense of urgency and vulnerability of populations and the need to act on those people, on behalf of those people who have been forced to flee. We have an accountability, a responsibility to be doing more to enhance preparedness, protection, support adaptation, not only for those people who are already displaced, but those people who are going to be made increasingly vulnerable in the future. If we know the impact of climate change is real, and if we know that there's going to be tens of millions of people made more vulnerable, then we need to be stepping up our game.
People displaced across borders in the context of climate change and disasters may in some circumstances be in need of international protection. Refugee law, therefore, has an important role to play in this area. On the eve of a high-level event on the impact of climate change on refugees, Andrew Harper, UNHCR's Special Advisor on Climate Action, not only talked about climate refugees, conflict triggers, by saying, rather than being reactive in the responses, there is need to anticipate, be prepared, be proactive, and by ensuring people are better protected. Andrew also talked on what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us about responding to global emergency.
Rather than being reactive in our responses, we need to anticipate, be prepared, be proactive, and where we can, by ensuring people are better protected, how can we prevent people needing to move in the first place? COVID-19 is adding an additional layer of vulnerability to displaced populations. Those areas often already have quite weak health systems, and those health systems are under additional pressure. Likewise, refugees, host communities are often in very precarious situations as far as socioeconomic conditions. They often have weak social safety nets, income can be very sporadic.
A few weeks after heavy rains hit Senegal, thigh-high stagnant water filled street after street in Dakar's suburbs. Angry residents asked what happened to a $1.4 billion agreement by the government to plan to protect citizens from rising flood risk. 3 months' worth of rain fell on one day, September 5th, forcing over 3,200 people to abandon their homes in the poor, low-lying outskirts of the capital and nearby city of Thiès.
ci jour boobu on m'a réveillé dañ ma yee 6 heures du matin ne ma am na kër guy dugal ndox ma jóg sol sama yére sol samay daal dem nekk ci ndox mi di génne ndox moom ba midi 1 heure ñu ne am na beneen kër tamit buy balaat ak ndox ma demaat foofu fa lañ nekk ba 22 heures ñu commencé génn ci mbedd mi commencé lijjantil fan la nit ñi war a aw.
Some residents had to be evacuated in temporary camps set up by the Keur Massar City Hall.
ñu ne ma yaay ndox maa ngi nii ma daal di yëkkati bi ma yëkkatee matla bi gis néeg yi bal ba nal néeg yi daal di fees suñu néeg yëpp daal di ball bi néeg yi feesee nag ci laa jóg ñu tooj lal yi bu ñu toojee lal yi bu may gën di ngacc muy gën di bëri may gën a ngacc muy gën di bëri sama waa kër dem ba amatuñu fu ñu toog xale yi sëkk ñaan garawaay lu ne ñu def ba amatuñu fu ñu toog léegi dem ba mënatuñ faa ne sama tànk yëpp dagg sama njaboot yi seen tànk yëpp dagg sama doom bi léegi la jóge ci hôpital bi léegi ci laa dem ci suñu chef de quartier mu yabal ma fii.
Many stricken locals liken their situation to move widespread urban floods in 2009 and 2012, crises which the authorities promised would be averted in the future, though its 2012-2022 flood management program worth $1.39 billion. Civil society groups and opposition leaders asked where the money went, that over 16,000 people were critically impacted by the last deluge, according to figures from the Senegalese Red Cross.
Pour enlever l'inondation, c'est très simple. Il faudra canaliser. On a un retard de 50 ans. Et c'est ça, il faut rattraper ce temps-là. Et ce que le gouvernement actuel essaye de faire, peut-être c'est pas rapide, peut-être je ne sais pas, mais en tout cas, à Keur Massar, on a canalisé 20 quartiers. Aujourd'hui, ces 20 quartiers, vous pouvez aller les visiter, sont canalisés. Il y a l'éclairage, il y a la canalisation et il y a un petit parc pour les enfants, pour les parcs sportifs. On l'appelle le projet PIC. Après canalisation, autour des bassins, on fait ce projet-là. Donc, on a commencé, mais Keur Massar, il y a 138 quartiers, 25 km². Et plus de 600 000 âmes qui se réveillent à Keur Massar. Donc, c'est une population vraiment dense et c'est pour cela, donc il n'y a jamais assez.
The plans included improving stormwater drainage, a priority in many West African countries, where seasonal floods are proving increasingly destructive due to rapid urbanization in flood-prone areas and heavier than normal rainfall. However, in 2014, a report by the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, managed by the World Bank, expressed concern that around 90% of Senegal's landmark flood plan was not funded. The World Bank told Reuters in email comments, without detailing the current size of the shortfall, that the government is working to resolve the gap. On September 8th, President Macky Sall said the government would soon provide an update on the plan and efforts to source funding for its completion. Some goals have been achieved. A $73 million storm water management project financed by the World Bank built over 50 kilometers of canals and 21 basins. This and other measures have protected 167,000 people from flooding, the lender said. In Dakar's Yembel district, the authorities built a system that funnels away excess water through a chain of basins. But some areas flooded again this season because of a lack of maintenance and a broken pump, locals said. The pump has not worked since 2014, said one resident, Ismaila Faye. As young children sloshed through water that has spilled into houses bordering a trash-logged swamp. The World Bank said the government had yet to follow through on a 2014 commitment to create a fund that finances the critical work of operating and maintaining drainage infrastructure. Meanwhile, the threat of neighborhoods like Kurmasa is rising. Floods in West Africa have increased from fewer than 2 per year before the 1990s to over 8 per year in the 2000s, according to a paper in the Journal of Flood Risk Management. We now take a break. When we come back, we have more on Zoom in Africa.